Hey, what's up everybody? Welcome back to my channel. I'm Fuller. Thank you for checking out the videos that I've been doing on Metasounds. And this video I'm real excited about because we're going to take a deep dive into my ambient horror underscore that I put out a few weeks ago. If you haven't checked that out, please go check that out. There's a demo out there of just kind of like the song with no talking. But in this video, we're going to get really deep into the Unreal Engine. We're going to talk about process. We're going to talk about generative music, how to make it, what it is, and all of those good things right here in this video. So I hope this is informative. And if you've been watching my Metasounds 101 videos, part 1 through 5, you're going to see a lot of those techniques that we talked about applied in this video. So if you haven't watched those videos, feel free to go back and watch those, check those out. There'll be some links in the description. But in this video, we're going to really just kind of look at the game world music that I created. It's a ambient, generative score that happens, and the player interacts with it. So what is generative music? Generative music, it's a phrase coined by Brian Eno, and basically what it is, it's music that changes over time. It's random and unpredictable, and in the gaming world, obviously that's a huge part of gameplay because you don't want your music to get stale. A player might explore for hours, and if you're just looping music, it gets really old. It's kind of like the It's a Small World syndrome, where it's just like over and over and over. So what generative music and procedural process does is it allows us as music composers, as gaming music composers, to create music that is alive. It's different every time you hear it, and it kind of helps tell that story. So this is a basic track we're going to be looking at. There's not a lot to it musically, and I'll talk a little bit about how I built the track. But this video isn't really focused on the music production side of things as much as it is the conceptual approach to how I wrote this piece and how I used the blueprints and the Metasounds to incorporate it into a really basic game level that I built so that you could kind of see conceptually how this stuff works. Cool thing is we didn't use any middleware. We didn't use Wise or Fmod or anything like that. This is all done completely in the Unreal Engine with Metasounds. So let's dive in. I have my session here open in the Unreal Engine, and we're going to be looking at three main things. Okay, so we're going to be looking at the third person map, which is right here, and we'll be talking about this in detail. We're going to be looking at the blueprint, or the Metasound that I called Creepy Music Box. And you can see it's a little complicated, and we'll dive in, but a lot of this will look familiar if you've watched my Metasounds videos. And then we're also going to be looking at the third person map, which is some of the blueprint logic that is really kind of helping drive the Metasound. So here's our map, and I'm just going to hit play, and I'm just kind of like walk you through what's happening here. So we've got our player here, our mannequin, and he's looking around. Right now I have an ambient pad playing. I have a couple different layers actually going on here. Let me eject out of here. If you go over to here, we've got a pad, we've got a pulse pad, and we've got a stutter pad. Now you're hearing the melody come in. Let's go back into him. Now as you look around, I've got a few labels here. Over here I built this creepy strings platform. So when we go up here, we're going to trigger some creepy strings. Call it creepy strings because it's creepy. And then I put a little log. You see that up there on the right, top left of the screen. You'll see creepy. Oh, I triggered the cellos by accident. Creepy strings are playing. So that tells us that the trigger box is working. And if you hear, now you got this kind of like ambient swelling in and out of the strings. It's kind of telling the story, and these are randomly generated, and it's just kind of adding that layer of suspense. Now we're gonna walk down here. Let's just assume the player's looking around and stuff. You know, everything's chill, a little freaky, a little eerie. You hear that driving pulse. That's all being generated. Now when I walk over here next to these fire pits, you're gonna hear the cellos come in, and it's gonna add some tension. And you see cello volume is 2. There they are. In perfect time. Oh, that's cool. Then you hear the cello and you hear that creepy string together. And as long as you're over here, you're going to be hearing those cellos. And then let's walk over here. Pardon walking through the rocks. I didn't bother building the boundaries there. So now we're going to walk up. Cello is back to 0. That has a little crossfade on it too, so it doesn't just punch you right in the face. Slowly fades up. And that cello passage is an array of cello passages generating multiple different ways, and we'll talk about that when we look at the Metasound. So it's getting creepy. I also wanted to do this. I built this little room over here. And disclaimer, I am not an epic, world builder. That's not my forte. I'm a composer and a sound designer. But hey, I'm having a lot of fun building these worlds in the Unreal Engine. They make it so easy. So I built this room here. When we go inside this room, it's gonna massively low pass everything, so it's gonna sound like we're inside a room. And let me just do that so you can hear how it affects the soundtrack. How cool is that? So now we're inside the room. This would be a great place if there was like a dude or a chick and they were giving us advice, or we were having dialogue here. And then also, and when we walk back out, you'll hear now it's back to full EQ range. And there was a few little tricks I did to make that smooth. I'll show you in a second. The other thing, when you walk in here, in addition to it making it sound like the music's outside, and I know this isn't technically source music, so it shouldn't necessarily have it sound like the music's outside, but I just thought it was a cool artistic effect and kind of display how we got here and how this mannequin is so stellar looking. I love it. Now, the other thing, when I walk in this box, it resets the creepy strings. So remember the creepy strings that we triggered when we walked on top of that platform? We reset that back to 0 when we walk in here. So it's another way to just kind of like control the story, if you will, of the sound. Because as composers in the game industry, we're telling stories. It's not linear. It's based on player action. So we'll walk back out here. Now we're back into the world, and we're back over here. Kick this box around. There's no sound effects in this, no footsteps or anything like that, because I wanted it to focus just on the music. We'll talk about that in some more videos, how to kind of sound design this. But come back over here. Cellos are rocking, freaking me out, making me feel like danger is on the horizon. And this is just basic stuff. This isn't, I think I spent like an hour making this track, so it's not like, revolutionary musically, but it does achieve our goal. And this could go on forever and ever and ever. Back up here, creepy strings come in. Now I did make it in a way that when the creepy strings get targeted, they stay there, because it's a cool layer, it's a cool element. And the strings and the cellos, they trigger at different intervals, so they're triggering in syncopation. So sometimes they'll get syncopated, and it creates a really cool vibe, but it's never the same. Then you hear the music box, the creepy music box. That's a melody that's being generated by the Unreal Engine. I gave it an array of notes and some vague parameters, but it never repeats itself. I mean, the odds of you hearing the same melody every time is like 0.0000000. I mean, it's almost impossible. So, and that's it. So, let's get out of here. Hope you enjoyed that track. Now let's look at it. So I'm not going to spend too much time on the actual world here, because this is just, kind of beyond the scope of the music. But just for reference, I do want you to know, there's a trigger box here. You can see the outline here. There's a trigger box here, and then there's a trigger box here. And we need these trigger boxes to communicate to the blueprints of the sound. And then there's also a trigger box here when you walk into the room. It's actually a little bit outside the room, but, whatevs. No big deal. So we put those trigger boxes in there, and we'll talk about how important that is when accessing the blueprint logic and the Metasound logic. Sorry. Let's look at the Metasound first, because this is kind of like the heart and soul of this. Now, so in here I've got just basically 3 main pieces. Okay, and let me just play this again. So you hear the pad start. You see these triggers here. You see on play. We've got this audio bed, which is pad. We've got this one is triggering, but it's on a delay. We'll talk more about that. And then I've got this riser over here. So this triggers instantly. And what I wanted it to do is I wanted the riser to trigger before everything started. So we've got the pad and the riser, and then once the riser triggers, once the riser meets the halfway point, the other two pads trigger. So watch this. So we hit play, riser's swelling up, you hear that, and then this triggers right at the end of the riser, and then this already triggered as well, but we'll talk about this in a second. So we've got the ambient underscore, these three wave players playing the ambient underscore, and I just commented them out here, ambient beds. This first ambient bed is this pad, and it is it's kind of like one of the hearts and souls of the track. It's got comes out here and it triggers this riser. These two things go into the submixer, and this is important because the mixing can start getting a little complicated, so submixers are really critical that help that. Then down here we also have got this key of C minor pad. So there's quite a few ambient pads happening that are pre-recorded audio tracks, adding lots of layers. These this and this is looped. The riser just happens once. You could repeat that later. And every now and then I might actually trigger the riser randomly, you know, a couple minutes in, just to give it a little bit of a kind of a transition vibe. But that's not necessary. Over here I've got the pulse pad, which is just kind of like a pulsating pad. And let me just play this. So that's happening in time. All this, by the way, is at 60 beats per minute. So that's creating a little tension there. Now this has, when this triggers on play, it actually has a delay. And the reason it has a delay, I have a 1 bar delay on it because I wanted the riser as 2 bars. And actually, you know what? Let's just go listen to the riser real quick by itself. It probably helps to hear all this stuff isolated. Here's the riser. So right when that hits, that's a bar into the riser. So I triggered this delay exactly 1 bar at 60 beats per minute. I can't talk. 60 beats per minute at same tempo as the riser. So as soon as that riser finishes, you hear this pulse pad start, and you'll see right here, boom. Now the pulse pad's going. It's subtle, you know, but it's a nice effect because I think it's nice to have like a beginning. That beginning doesn't repeat. Once that beginning plays, it's done. Then we have down here the stutter pad, and let me play what that sounds like. It sounds like this. So that's kind of like an in and out drone that just adds nice little tension. Now here's something. If you watched my video on cue points, you will know that these cue points, so what I did is the stutter pad has 4 cue points embedded in the sound. And the reason I did this is because I wanted to create a certain amount of randomness and different levels of randomness. So, you know, if something's too random, it just gets weird. If it's not random enough, it gets boring. So there's that fine line. So as many algorithms as you can throw in there to create randomness, the better. And so the way I did this is I came down here, and we'll talk about this AI melody in a second, because this is a really critical piece in this, and this is a really cool, fun thing that I'm really proud of on this part. But what this cue point's allowing us to do is, if you remember from our trigger video, the trigger compare node right here, this is comparing integers, just whole numbers, right? So each cue point is a number, like 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. So what this does is every time this song passes a cue, every time this pad here, the stutter pad passes a cue point, it goes to this trigger compare, and it asks, okay, I'm going to compare this trigger because which trigger is it? So the trigger cue point ID is coming out, and so when it triggers a cue point, it's going to send what cue point ID that is. So let's say it's cue point ID 0. So this trigger compare node now gets that information. We just hit cue point 0. Then what it does is it compares it. Is it 3? Because is it equal to 3? If it's not equal to 3, don't do anything. Okay? So just don't do anything. Well, actually, it does something. It actually comes into the trigger counter. We'll explain that in a minute. Is it 2? Is it? No. But when that hits the third cue point, it's going to trigger out true. okay? And then it's going to go to the trigger repeat. The trigger repeat starts the melody. Then it hits the next cue point. Is it equal to 3? No, it's not, because 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, it's only going to hit the number 3 cue one time every time the whole track plays. The whole cue plays. The whole wave plays. So when it's not hitting 3, it's counting it. And then so I put this logic in here. So anytime it's not 3, it starts counting. And every time it counts to 4, you see, 3 prime number, 4 even number. Every time this gets to 4, then this stops this trigger repeat. So it stops playing the melody. It stops playing the AI generated melody. And then because of that, it cycles through. So you have 3 and 4. So you got 0, 1, 2, 3, yes. 4, 1, 2, 3, no, until it counts 4 times. So there might be some times where it hits 3, but that's also the 4th time, so it doesn't play it. So it's giving you a multiple 4 times 12. It's giving you a 12 multiple ways of triggering it. So it takes the normal randomness and then it even makes it multiplied, an exponential randomness, which is really cool. It might be a little confusing, but if you study the trigger video, you'll know that. Now, here's what we did for the melody. So the AI trigger box melody that you hear, which is the creepy strings, I kind of built a sampler out of the Metasounds. It's kind of like a workaround because there's no real sampler in Metasounds. So what I did is I brought this out, the trigger sequence, because what I like about trigger sequence is we've got 5 sequences, and every time this triggers, once this cue point hits 3, it's going to trigger the trigger repeat, and the trigger repeat's going to start. It's going to trigger a note every quarter note here because I've got a beat divider here setting the period. So now it's triggering, and it's triggering through this sequence. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. It's going to do this until this reaches 4, and then it's going to stop it like it just did. Then we hear no melody until we come back around to that 3rd cue point again, and this one. And then once we come back to this 3rd cue point again, it's going to trigger that melody again, and it's going to start this sequence over right here. This sequence also, so here it goes. And sometimes you'll hear something and sometimes you won't. We'll explain that in a minute. So what's cool about that is if you just had random quarter notes over and over and over again, that would get monotonous too. But by adding an output node that's empty, it gives us a space. It gives us a random space. So it might be quarter notes, and then it might be quarter note rest, which is nice. Now, each of these wave players, here's how I built my sampler. So this wave player plays an A all the time. Okay, so we get that a lot. Then this wave player plays a D sharp, which helps, kind of give us that dissonance, right? Then, as you go down here, output 3 goes all the way over here, and this is what I'm calling the secondary AI melody, because what this does, this goes to another trigger that sometimes plays nothing, and then sometimes plays this note, which is C. It also sometimes goes to another trigger sequence, which also sometimes plays nothing, and sometimes it plays here. What's cool here is this wave actually has an array in it, and I put a note batch in it. So this could play a D, or it could play a D sharp. So now you can see all these combinations are starting to add up. Either way, it's very dissonant because the notes are dissonant. They're very chromatic, so it's kind of creepy. But this happens at very random intervals. Then you come down here, you've got this wave player. Then you've got this one. Now when you get down here, you have another random array. So every now and then, you're going to get this random array of these 3 extremely dissonant notes. And this is going to go into this wave player, and it's going to go out all to the submixer. So all of these melodies, as you can see, go back around to this submixer. So this submixer right here is our AI melody, basically. Then, after all that, let's look at the cellos and the strings. what's happening over here. So let me zoom out just a little bit so you can see overview. Here's the whole Metasound. Okay, so we started with the bass pads. We came over here for the AI melody. Here's the subset AI melody all going into the mixer. Then over here, we've got creepy strings randomization, okay? And what I did here is on play, this triggers a repeat. However, it delays the repeat. So again, we're over here. We're actually waiting 4 bars before that creepy strings melody even starts, because we don't ever want it to start right away. And I could change that. I could make that 20 bars. I could make that a random float or a random integer. I could make that on a shuffle. I could make it sometimes 4 bars, sometimes 8 bars. Who knows? You can do whatever you want, and you can maximize the randomness. So once that starts, it hits the trigger repeat. It's repeating. Check this out. It's going to repeat every 9 bars. Why 9 bars? It's an 8-bar pattern. Well, because 9 bars starts, if you keep triggering an 8-bar pattern every 9 bars, you start getting this polyrhythm shift. So now, instead of hearing the same play, the same audio over the same beats, it starts shifting. So now the downbeat's the upbeat, or the downbeat's the 3. And so it creates, and the same thing's happening with the cellos. So all this combined, you just constantly are getting this really cool polyrhythms, and it's different every time. Comes over here, I've got an array set over here. Now over here, this is the creepy string array. This is what I'm calling the creepy string array. And what it is let's get out of here. So let me just play a few of these. So these are all in time. These are at 60 beats per minute. But they're simple, subtle. Some of them are a little, that one's creepier, right? And I have a history with reality television. I do a lot of production music for reality shows. One of my main genres is cinematic tension. So cinematic tension is my forte. So I'm using a lot of the concepts and principles I do cinematic tension with, and I'm applying in here. So as you're composing, you're thinking in layers, right? You have to think differently than just linear sound. Some of them are real creepy. But that kind of gives you an idea of the sounds that we're using for the array here. There's the array. Then it comes in here, and then we have a volume knob and an interp into the submixer. This submixer right here is mixing the cellos and the creepy strings. And we'll talk about that, because remember we had a trigger box that set those off. So we had to separate those. Off of this interp, what this does is this takes whatever this volume is. Right now we're on 0. We're on a scale basically of 0 to 2. 2 is, pretty loud in the mix. 0 is you can't hear it at all. So these default to 0. So even if these are playing, you're not hearing them. However, when you walk in that trigger box communicates to this through the blueprint and says, hey, turn up those strings, turn up those cellos. And what it does is it sets the volume to 2, but then this interp takes 1.5 seconds. So go from where it was, which is 0, to 2, but do it over 1.5 seconds. So it's not abrupt. It's nice and smooth. When you leave that trigger box, it fades back out. Both these work the same way. Here's my cellos. Same thing with the cellos. One small thing here. It starts, it triggers. There's a trigger delay, obviously, because we're huge fans of trigger delays. Now what this does here, this gets a little complicated. So let's look at this. This triggers, it plays this sound, random array, same thing. These are cello strings. So you're getting that. You're getting this. These are subtle patterns, and these are all audio, right? This is audio that I pre-produced in Logic Pro X. Then you'll get some simple ones, but just enough to kind of create some variations. So let's close this out. Oopsie. And then go over here. So that's our array that we're pulling cello sums. So when we start immediately, we trigger. So this trigger any, right? Remember we talked about the trigger any in our trigger videos. Go back and watch those if you haven't. Trigger any, basically any of these things. If any of these things happen, it's going to play this. It's going to play this random array. It's going to grab one, and it's going to play it. It's going to play it out of here. And here's what I love about Metasounds, they added this feature. It was a lifesaver on nearly finished, which is like the sample right before the next audio block. It's going to send out this variable that I created called onFinished. That variable is coming back around here, and we're going to get a delayed variable. And the only reason you do this is so it doesn't create a loop. So you get the delayed variable. It triggers sequence 2, right? It triggers this now. This goes out back to here and triggers that sound again. However, the next time that it triggers, it's going to go out here. And so what this does, this is a trigger delay. So now this trigger delay is actually, look at this, 2 beats, half a measure delay. Why are we doing that? We're doing that because we don't want the cellos to get locked into this grid. So now what happens is every few times it's going to shift the cellos over 2 beats. And then what that's going to do, again, over time, it's going to create a polyrhythm. And if you don't know what a polyrhythm is, go Google it. But it's basically when rhythms start getting more complicated over time. If you're doing 2 beats in this hand and 3 beats in this hand, they get off, and then eventually they get back on again, and it's a really cool tribal effect. Really great for creating tension. And all this is done with triggers. And that's it. Same thing here with the cello volume, just like the strings. It interps to 1.5, interpolates up there. Boom. Now, one other little feature, okay? We talked about when you walk inside that room and it's a low-pass filter. What we did there is, and this took me a little while to do it right, but I added a low-pass filter, and I just basically passed that right before the main output. So everything that's playing gets low-pass filter, so it's literally like you're inside and you can't hear the music. Or you can hear just, a little bit of it. What I did with this is because 65 hertz is a nice cutoff. You still hear kind of the low end. And 20,000 is like full range, right? The difference between the 65 hertz to 20,000, that's a massive range. And so what happens if you go from 65 to 2,000 really fast, it's going to be very abrupt because your ear's just going to hear, nothing and then everything. And it's going to kind of be glitchy, if you will. So I played around a little bit, and the best solution I found for this case was when you go into the trigger box, it does a trigger. The first thing it does, so right away when the Metasound starts, the high pass filter or the low pass filter is off. So when you go into the room, it triggers this value. So we cut it down to 250 over 0.3 seconds, and then there's a delay also. So when that cuts it down to 250, then it cuts it from 250 to 80, and then we've got a nice smooth low pass. When we walk out of the trigger box, the opposite happens. It goes from 80 to 750, which is a nice range to start hearing stuff, but it's not super bright. And then when that's done over 0.3 seconds, this delay fires, and it goes from 750 to 20,000 full range in about a third of a second. And that felt pretty natural to me. I had to play around with that a lot. So that's the blueprint, or that, I keep saying blueprint. That is the Metasound, right? That's the magic. That's the heart and soul. Now keep in mind, we've got some pad layers. We've got the music box sampler that I made. Oh, by the way I made that music box sampler, I just sampled a music box of 5 or 6 notes, and I used those notes as WAV files and played them. So I've kind of basically built a mini sampler there. We've got the cello movement, we've got the creepy strings movements, and all that together makes a really cool, freaky, kind of CSI vibe, searching around, creepy tension. And you can back off the tension a little bit. You could go a little more chromatic, but it's whatever. It's a game. Let's make it freaky. One more thing now. Let's talk about blueprint. So if you go to the level blueprint, third person map, here's how I did this. There's probably a better, more efficient coding way to do this, but I'm pretty new, so I this is probably perfect. But let's look at this real quick. There's 3 main things happening here. When we go in the first trigger, the trigger box, okay? So the one that says cellos come in here. When I go in there, what I did is I pulled in an actor begin overlap and an actor end overlap on that trigger box, okay? And explaining how to do that's a little bit beyond the scope of this tutorial, but let me just show you a quick example. If you go into your world and you click on the trigger box, it's probably easier to click on it over here. Let's go over here. If you click on the trigger box, then you go to your third person map. You can right click, and then you can add a collision reference to that. So that's how you get this in here. Now, once you did that, you have to pull out of here a set float parameter to tell the Metasound what to change that number to, that volume number. Because at this point, we're just turning, the cello's already playing, you just can't hear it. We're going to turn it up. Now, here's the most important piece when you're working with the blueprint. You've got this Ambient play. You've got to have the component. If you don't have this Metasound component, then you're not going to be able to access it. And if you notice, all of these set float parameters and execute trigger parameters and set float parameter over here, these are all, they have to be targeting this. This is your Metasound. This is telling the blueprint, this is the Metasound we want to manipulate. So when you go in the volume, first cello volume, triggers this Metasound cello volume. Okay, why is that important? Because this is the input for the cello volume. So when we look over here, this input we created right here, cello volume. If this name is not exactly the same, it's useless. It will not work. You will not hear any changes. So you got to make sure these names are right. Then I like to debug. You know, I like to debug. Check out my video, Don't Sleep on Debug. This comes out and we're just printing it on the screen. Because I like it. I like it when I go over here. Bam. Cello volume is 2. Creepy. And then I walk out. Cello volume is 3. That's important to me because I want to know this stuff's working. Because it might not be the sound. It might be the sound that's not playing properly. Or it might be the array is not right. But at least I know the trigger box is working. Then you walk out of the trigger box. Same thing. It tells cello volume this time 0. So we're addressing the same input. We're just telling here we want it to go to 2. And again, when we tell it to go to 2, it does it, but it goes through this interpolate. So it takes 1.5 seconds. Then down here, same thing with the creepy strings. When we step on this box over here, this box right over here, creepy strings, you'll see it as soon as we step in there, creepy strings are playing. Now, you can't hear them too much now because they're super subtle. They're coming in a little bit here. You can hear that. And that's designed to be subtle because you don't want that to be too annoying. The way that happens on trigger box for that trigger, different trigger, okay, same target. Setting the float parameter. That's all we're doing is setting the gain and string volume. Go back, check your Metasound. That input is indeed called string volume. For some reason, I spell strings wrong a lot. I always put the I after or before the R, and it's styring or something like that. So always check that, make sure that works. We're going to 2.5. Now, if I wanted to change that volume, I could do it right here in the blueprint. I could go, no, I want that to be 5, and then those are going to be super loud. And then again, the debug. And then last but not least, when we go in the brick room, we get the low pass and the string reset. Same thing. You go over here, you click on your trigger box. That's right. Can I do it? Can I do it? Can I do it? There it is. I'm in the trigger box. Go in there. We're accessing the trigger box. When we go inside, again, remember, it's super important. This execute trigger has to be targeted to that same Metasound. If we pull that Metasound in again and target it, it's targeting 2 different ones and it won't work. Trust me, I've tried. So this is trigger box goes out here. Now it's telling trigger low pass on. That's what it's, this is a target. This is a trigger parameter. This is not a float parameter. So instead of sending a number, it's actually targeting the trigger. What trigger? It's targeting this trigger right here. Creepy strings. We're where are we? Yeah, no, what are we targeting now? I just forgot. Oh no, low pass filter. Trigger low pass is on. So we're targeting trigger low pass way over here. Boom. We're targeting this one. Trigger low pass on. Trigger low pass on, and low pass is active. Then we're also, because remember we wanted our room to reset our creepy strings, we also set that float parameter of creepy string volume back to 0. So when we come out of that room, the creepy strings aren't playing anymore. So it just gives more levels of dynamics. Again, it's all about generative. It's all about procedural. There's something happening and it's generating sound. It's generating music. It's literally telling the story of the player, where the player goes, what the player does, manipulates the music. This is what's so exciting about nonlinear music and AI. You know, the AI is working for us. Then when we leave the room, we go to trigger low pass off, and that turns off the trigger right here. Super fun. I mean, it's so cool. It's so fun. I just like playing around and just walking around my game. Now, granted, I could have gray boxed this, and this could be boring, but you know, put some world in there. I like seeing the rocks and kind of match the vibe of the music. I do think it's important that our music matches the vibe of the game, right, artistically. And if everything was just gray boxes, it's like creepy music. It's not that creepy, but now it's kind of creepy because of the fires and oh my gosh, what's over here and what's behind this rock, and I don't know. And it also just gives you something, you know, kind of like fun to do. So that is, in a nutshell, a walkthrough of the Ambient Horror underscore. If you have any questions or comments, please feel free to put those in the comments section. I hope this was really helpful to you as you're getting into Metasounds, game design, game music, game audio, whatever it is. It's a blast. It's fun, and as a composer, it really really pushes you to think a whole different way when you're composing and writing music for stuff that's not linear. And it's all over. It's not just in video games. It's coming. It's all over. It's going to be everywhere. It's going to be in theme parks. It's going to be in vehicles, everywhere, you name it, in grocery stores. So this is it. I hope you enjoyed the video. Like and subscribe, and we'll see you in the next video. Thanks.